Thank you very much for that comment. And I had to look up what FIBUA means. It's fighting in built-up areas, I believe. And yes, Romans would have had to have done that. And I've got two things I can show you and talk about, which I think demonstrate the Roman approach to it, or understanding that close quarter combat wasn't always going to be on their terms on the battlefield. Sometimes it was going to be even closer quarter fighting, if you get what I mean. So the first thing I want to show is something I've shown before. I should always add and just say that this is not bladed, it's not dangerous, it's a paperweight, nothing else really, and that is the Pugio. So I don't get in trouble with anyone on here. This is not bladed, it's purely something that is sort of just to show people what it looked like. So this is my Pugio, this was the dagger, a sidearm that the Roman legionaries would have. The really interesting argument about this is how much of a standard piece of kit it was, because finds indicate that this wasn't just given to every single legionary. So it wasn't a case of you got this alongside, say, Gladius, your Scutum, and everything else. And the question is why that might be. Well, this was predominantly a weapon that seems to have been, shall we say, borrowed from northern Spain. So it comes into effect more towards the end of the 2nd century BC. This is argued, by the way, when the Romans are fighting in northern Spain, and they're coming across tribes who have very, very effective short sidearms. And they decide that that's actually a really good idea. And they do what Rome often does, which is steal it, or rather be influenced by it. And so they're inspired by this weapon. In the same way, actually, they were inspired by the gladius, because again, the gladius wasn't originally a Roman weapon. It was a weapon they'd experienced at the nasty end during the Second Punic Wars, and then adapted and used and became the iconic Roman weapon that we know today. So the reason that you might use this is when things get really close and ugly. And in fact, there are a couple of references in the sources. In particular, I think there's one reference to where a Roman camp, I think it's in Gaul, is being overrun, or it's under attack in some form. And you've got people sort of climbing over the barricades and everything else. This comes into its own in that instance, because a gladius, though it is a short sword, still needs a fair amount of room to maneuver. Again, I've done videos on this. You can probably go through and find some. I'll see if I can stitch one. Oh, sorry, I'll see if I can put one and pin it to the profile. So again, where Rome is coming up against that kind of combat situation, it may be that this weapon was therefore standard piece of kit, as opposed to where it was less likely to be the case, where it wasn't so. At least that seems to be one argument. So again, we have this idea of Roman kit not being standardized. It could be where you were based. You're more likely to have that kind of a combat situation. Ergo, you have that kind of a weapon to help you deal with it. The second piece is actually a defensive piece of kit, and I've often wondered about this. And I think it's a sort of side, or it's a secondary aspect to it. But anyway, here we go. This is the helmet. This is my helmet. Apologies, it is rusty because, or it's not rusty, but it's not exactly clean. I've got a school visit in a couple of months, and I need to desperately give all of my kit a good scrub before they get all the fingerprints from the kids on it. Anyway, you've got the front, yes, and we know about the front. What I find really interesting, always have done, to be honest with you, is the back, because you've got this extended, so this is mid-1st century or thereabouts helmet. And what you tend to find is that in the development of the Roman helmet, you always have, from the earliest adoption of the helmets the Romans are wearing, a sort of what they call a reverse jockey's peak. So it's almost like a very narrow baseball cap. It always has a bit of a ridge protecting the neck, and that gets bigger and bigger as the helmets develop. And of course, the main reason for that is sword blows across the back, because you are exposing a lot of yourself in close quarter combat, and you want to be as protected as you can. One easy way is to have this kind of a sort of, well, I suppose you'd call it a shelf or whatever. You've got a ridge to protect the upper sort of neck, shoulders, that sort of a thing. I also wonder to what extent this would help you if people are throwing things on you. So again, I talk about that siege scenario. You're in amongst the houses, you're fighting, you're in a very different landscape, and suddenly all of a sudden you've got people in front of you, but perhaps the most dangerous people are up there and they're throwing things down on you. And if you've got something like this, well, this is going to help protect the back of your neck, that really vulnerable part where people might be directly over you and lobbing stuff down. And you can only imagine, if you consider, if you didn't have that, you imagine if you get hit on the back of the neck, the top of the shoulders by a heavy object, that's always going to cause something bad to happen. I mean, it could result in the really bad thing, but it could incapacitate you. This, hopefully, I think, would have alleviated that. And I'm not saying that was why this was made that way. Rome was very good at adapting single use, or sorry, having something on their kit that might have 3 or 4 uses. So ultimately, if this is going to help stop a sword blow or something from hitting your back of your neck, it might also do something similar if you've got, for example, people throwing things down. So those are 2 things that I think would have helped in a fighting at very close quarters scenario. So thanks again for your comment. Appreciate it.